So today, I'm thrilled to be with Natalija Pavic, a seasoned product marketing leader at Salesforce with over 17 years of experience in the industry. Nat has held various roles in product sales, solution strategy, and marketing, showcasing her versatility and expertise. Currently, you're the Alliances strategy for Salesforce Commerce Cloud, where you are responsible for partner go-to-market strategy and joint marketing content. You also have a podcast at Salesforce, which is a platform where you engage with different thinkers, and I think that's amazing. So we're both podcast hosts. Nat, you have a passion for innovation, and it's pretty evident in your work. Also have a patent for generative promotions at Salesforce and extensive experience and forward thinking. I'm very, very excited to have you on today. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. And I saw the work that you were doing, and I was like, "This is perfect." You're talking to the right people, and you've got the right topic. So I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
So, as I said, you have a diverse career spanning product sales, marketing, and much more. How has that unique experience shaped your understanding of like Gen AI and the potential it has in e-commerce?
Yeah, and it's interesting. I was looking at my 17 years of experience, which sounds like a lot, but it's not as much when you consider I started in tech very early, and I haven't really I've been in tech for the entire time, and so I've done not only a variety of roles, but also worked for a variety of companies like IBM and BlackBerry, and then Salesforce. So I've actually, sold servers at some point, and I was like testing. So there's like everything from hardware to services to PR to software, and then at Salesforce also I've done a lot of stuff. Sorry, I like totally lost my train of thought. What was your question?
It's just like how your diverse background
Yeah.
shaped your understanding of Gen AI and like the potential it has in e-commerce.
Yeah, great question. So I think we're at the like bulletin board stage of generative where we've had this new technology, it's been released, kind of like the beginning of the internet. But we haven't really defined the use cases very well. So we don't have the big, when the internet came out, then it was like, oh, we're going to have social media, and then we're going to have streaming services, then we're going to have transportation services. So out of that came a lot of different categories. And we just don't have that for generative. It's very, very early days. And so what's great is having, talk to clients and talking to use cases, and also interviewing all of the guests. I just get a ton of ideas thrown at me. I started to end every episode with like, how do you personally use AI? And it's been very fascinating and informative to figure out all of the ways in which people are ideating where generative can be helpful. If we're still very early days, it's going to be exciting to see what shape it takes moving forward.
I agree. And I'm curious to get your take on what's some of the most transformative impact that Gen AI is having right now in e-commerce,
Yeah.
and what gets you like really excited about it, right?
Yeah. Um, so I think that, and what I like about the e-commerce space is that it drives, because it's revenue generating, it drives the technology use case and cements them. It's wherever we can sort of sell product and make money is where generative gets used. And we've seen a lot of merchant productivity use cases. So obviously here at Salesforce, we release generative product descriptions, smart promotions, Copilot, where we have a personal assistant that can recommend stuff. And then in terms of like future use cases, I've been playing around with GPT and using it for product selection. And I think now that it's out there and people are using it as a service, replacing really Google search, we're going to see a lot more product recommendations, and hopefully, maybe they'll have a buy button or add to cart or automatic purchases or connectors to your existing shopper instances. But definitely we're seeing product recommendations is a huge one, especially in industries that have complexity to them, like manufacturing, where you need to know the details. You need to figure out all of the considerations that you need to make. This is where generative has the ability to scrape and understand and revert back to you in context to help you in your decision making. So that's like one huge area. And then the other unexplored area, and I think there's a lot of companies trying to do this, Salesforce included, is this topic of personal assistants is, of course, you have your personal assistant on your device, but then you have a shopping personal assistant. So how can we engage and interact and make that, what was a chat bot on the site way better for e-commerce use cases? So if that personal assistant can, sense or understand that you don't want to buy something because of the shipping costs, and they can provide a personalized promotion to you to give you free shipping to help you convert. So there's a ton of stuff where that's going to be super useful. And then I would say search, being able to search for things on your site using natural language as opposed to keywords. Because I think we have a lot of advanced keywords type analyses like vector search, which is codified search. We have affinity search, which uses your profile. But really that ability to understand the sentiment of what somebody's looking for and not having to say like red dress and speaking like Google language, but actually being able to use real language to find something. So there's also that sort of unexplored opportunity.
Mm-hmm. And so we've mentioned that you host a podcast as well, right? Focused on e-commerce innovation. When you get guests on there, what kind of common concerns do you hear from them about adopting such technology?
Yeah, and quick flyby, Salesforce Commerce Cloud Innovations podcast, quick promo. You can find it anywhere you listen to podcasts, so please subscribe and follow. Concerns really range from like ethical concern. There's a lot of emphasis on trust. We know that a lot of generative has hallucination issues. So we actually have a whole team. I think we have multiple teams working on trust. And that's really what Salesforce brings to the table, is that ability to moderate and monitor what your generative is doing, from having a human in the loop to having citations. So being able to make sure that it's listing its sources so that it's not hallucinating. So I think there's a lot of ethical concerns for using AI. I think also there is what should AI solve, which is like the lack of use case or lack of guidance on that. And then there's also using AI to do things like implementation. So I've seen a lot of partners starting to use AI in their practice to both speed up development, to speed up delivery, to really take that benefit of productivity. And that the same can be said for customers, to being able to generate, take an iframe or a Figma and generate the UI and being able to do more of that stuff. But really the concerns around trust and ethics and moderating and gating and making sure that you don't just have the AI, you don't just give it access to all of your data, but you have a data policy in place where you determine how that data is used by the AI, because data and AI kind of like go together, right? So those are like the two sort of pieces of making generative really work.
How do you reassure people that are kind of scared of losing their job to these technologies?
Oh, that is a good question. I think, well, okay, so I was look at the chess example. So when Deep Blue came out and IBM developed chess, prior to that innovation, chess masters and chess players would get together and they would review books and they would review strategy and previous games. When Deep Blue came out, there was like a whole scare of like, oh no, now it's like chess is not, chess is going to be replaced by robots, but like nobody wants to watch robots play chess with each other. So that wasn't the thing. And what happened actually is when chess players started adopting AI and training with technologies like Deep Blue and training with AI based tools to give them strategy ideas and move ideas, they improve their performance. And so we see that it's really the human plus AI that is the net benefit or the beneficiary of the new system. So it's more of a you got to kind of get on the train now. You got to figure out how to use AI for your job, because then that's going to unlock a whole other level of productivity and efficiency, and that's going to create sort of new avenues and new roles and new areas and new opportunities. I can't speak, there's a whole bunch of things above my pay grade in terms of like to what extent it's going to change our economy, but I can't really speculate in that area. I like to think of it as it's out there, and becoming now a practitioner of it can really greatly benefit you.
How would you, so you just mentioned that people should get on the train. How would you recommend someone that, has no clue or no baseline in technology to get started with this? Like would you recommend they start learning or, practicing, getting in touch with this technology?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, look, you're doing a great job. You're talking to a lot of people in the industry. That's one great way to do it, is just to really interact with people who are practitioners of the technology that's being created. The other thing is, GPT's out there. You can go and you can test it out, and you can use it for various different things, and you can start to play around with it. I've been doing some, image generation. So I actually used to make comics, and I didn't for a while because of the amount of time it takes to draw it. And I was like, why can't I get AI to generate the comics for me? And then I went and I played around with that. So just kind of using it for personal use cases, so that you sort of start to understand what it's for, and like on a practical level is probably the best. And there's a ton of like courses out there on AI, and you don't necessarily, coding is not the only career path for technologists in the technology industry. It's not just coding. There's so much more. Like I'm in marketing. You could use it for marketing purposes. You could use it for project management. Like there's tons of different ways for product design. You don't have to come at it from like a coder perspective in order to, make the technology and have the technology be useful to you.
I can really relate to that. And um, I think a couple of weeks ago, I was talking to a leader in the AI industry or so, and one of her quotes was to actually come in this space with authenticity. And I think that that's really important, right? Like in the future, in this space, we're going to need people from all of the different backgrounds that we have today that may feel like a little bit further away from AI, but we're going to need them also to be included and to bring their expertise. So I think that's a really good advice. So you hold a patent for generative promotions. I mentioned that a little bit earlier. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So this patent is really for promotions. It was inspired, I would say, by the automotive industry. So I'm not going to name names, but there is a specific, company out there where the majority of their budget, and this is not unusual in manufacturing, is really used towards incentives. And so they'll have a huge, wild, billions of dollars, literally, that they'll say, okay, we have billions of dollars. Here are the incentives that we're going to give away for these cars. And they had no insight into the effectiveness of those promotions. So they would say, I think, we've got an uptick of sales, but what would frequently happen is uh, the sellers at the dealer would just really pull ahead. They would pull ahead the deal in order to get the benefit of the promotion in month, as opposed to closing it next month. And so it looked like they would have a spike of sales, but actually overall they may have been losing money. And so I thought, well, that's ridiculous. Shouldn't you have some sort of insight? So my patent, and you can find it on LinkedIn, is called Dynamic Audience Management and Promotion Execution. It's really like an autonomous system to check the ROI. And so what it is it generates a promotion, tests it, checks it against a P&L, and then designs a new promotion based on audience segmentation. So there's also the idea of like personalizing the promotion. So being able to create an audience segment for a subset instead of allowing that promotion to be available to everyone and anyone, when that promotion might not be used to increase conversions if this specific audience member is like, say, has the money and isn't going to be convinced is going to buy the car anyway. Should we really be giving them the promotion? Is that going to help our P&L? So it's really around that. And the use cases are manufacturing, complex products, any industry that has a lot of incentives. So it's really to provide insight and sort of automate creating the best promotions from an ROI perspective.
Very interesting. And we've seen Gen AI revolutionize also product description, product recommendation, and a lot of those, categories. Can you elaborate how businesses can ensure that these descriptions, so if we talk about product descriptions, are accurate, compelling, and really on brand?
Yeah, so it's all about the tools that you use, right? At Salesforce, we actually have a prompt UI that allows you to define the type of brand voice that you want the description to be written in, because it's one thing to write a description, but then it's another thing to have it be in your brand voice. So you kind of want to define that, and you want to define that across many different languages. And then what we do is we just have a human in the loop. We have you check it. So you're not authoring and you're not spending hours writing it, but there is a mechanism to double check that it's accurate before it goes out. And then also we use a product attribute. So part of the description is taking in the details of the product that are appended in the product information log. And so, if we're talking about a car and it's red and we know that it's red, then that could be part of the description, right? So it's a combination of checking, but also defining the prompt that's going to generate the description.
Can you share a bit of examples of how AI copilots, for example, are being used effectively in e-commerce?
It's really in two areas. One is merchant productivity. And so what Copilot is at Salesforce is it's really that center brain. And so from Copilot, you generate the actions. And so you can have a service action, an action that's used for support use cases, or you can have a marketing action, an action that's used for marketing use cases, or you can have a commerce action. And so it's all kind of like the same brain. But we have it defined between merchant productivity and then customer engagement. And so Salesforce Copilot is used for primarily currently generative product descriptions and creating promotions. So when you create a promotion, you may have to enter in a lot of different qualifiers. But what if you could just tell it in natural language what type of promotion to create for you, and it did that on the back end. So those are two different areas. And then we have the product recommendation. So I interact with a chatbot and I ask it for a recommendation, and using my keywords and analyzing my intent, it surfaces products that match my criteria based on its ability to understand natural language. So those are sort of like the two sides. We think of merchant productivity, and then we think of customer engagement.
Mm-hmm. Can you try to paint a picture for me on how Gen AI has like changed the e-commerce business?
Well, it's interesting. I wouldn't say it has yet. I think that it's untapped. I think, and if you listen to like the state of AI, my episode on the state of AI adoption, which I did with Becky Wright, and when we talk to partners in the field, when we talk to customers in the field, we're still at the like wait and see stage. The benefit is that all of the innovations that we have are sort of automatically available to our customers. And so that's sort of the benefit of being a cloud product, a SaaS product, is we have this, now you can use it. That just because they have it available doesn't mean that they're actively using it. And so we're seeing a little bit of the wait and see. I don't really know. I don't have like a benchmark for you to say like it's been adopted XYZ, but I can tell you that people are still vetting it and trying to define and decide which generative they're going to be using. I think this concept of optimizing your products for generative is relatively new. In the past, we used to worry about SEO, but now we have to worry about GPT and making sure that your products are discoverable with GPT. And so there's a lot of work right now around data, clean data, accessible data, the right data, collecting the right data is super, super important to making sure your AI is effective. And so there's a lot of emphasis on our product data cloud. We are investing a ton in that area. And that's definitely something that all of our customers should be looking at, because Data Cloud connects all of our different products, and it sort of gives you like a 10x, 100x return on your Salesforce investment. So there's a lot of concerns around how should I be preparing my data, and then evaluating current technologies and what makes sense out there. And it's not just stuff released by Salesforce. Also, all of our ISVs, aka our technology partners in the ecosystem, are, they're publishing a ton of generative stuff. Like if I take a look at Builder.io, which is a headless CMS, they have literally they can take you from a frame, a Figma, to a real UI, and you can sort of start to design and define the UI using prompts. And we've got something similar in Page Builder where you like give it a prompt and then you can define it. But what's interesting here, and if I could just like ramble a little bit, and I'll give you another use case of generative in our ISV, is prompt engineering is now the new skill, right? Before it was like, oh, coding. Now it's like, actually, how do I create the prompt that's going to give me the result that I'm interested in? And so it's actually a new skill that we now have to learn, in addition to it helping us. It's better, but it's definitely something that we have to be better at as consumers and as practitioners of generative. There's also a lot of unexplored potential within analytics. So being able to ask it for insights, having it give you the insights that you're asking for. And then I know some of our partners like 3Kit, they are using generative to generate images. So for example, in the situation where you have a complex product and there's a built to order process. So basically each product that you sell is unique and the customer has to configure it. In order to have images update on that product display page or PDP, you could like make every single variation of that product, or you could have 3Kit generate the image of every single variation. And that it's a market increase in productivity to not have to build and then photo shoot, do a shoot with that products, but you could just ask it to generate. And that really improves online conversions because like if you have a richer set of pictures, it really brings the product to life. So there's a ton of stuff being used for there's a ton of generative now popping into these ISV technologies to help you generate product images. That's I think also huge.
What are your most promising applications that you see are coming in the future or you want to see coming to life in e-commerce?
Yeah, great question. So definitely generate a web page, generate code is a huge one, creating new experiences. Generating images needs to be a lot better. It's okay, but it's still very, very creepy. And I think that there's also like, I don't know what data set we're training it on, but there's like definitely a lack of diversity. Like if you ask it to generate people, there's definitely like a lack of diversity in the people that it generates. Like a lot of them end up being white. And it's really annoying when I'm generating images to have to tell it specifically call out that these people need to be diverse. So it's just there's like weird and funky things about image generation that need to be a lot better. And I think that video generation also needs to. This is a separate experience, but immersive is a huge category that could be really helped by generative. So creating an immersive world in virtual reality really has low fidelity right now. It's not photographic. And it takes a lot of effort to design a virtual space. So in my interview with Hunter Smith from Unity, we talked about how generative could be used to fill and fill the gaps, create the worlds, ask it to build a fountain and it builds a fountain for you so that you're not. So I think generative is also like the gatekeeper of immersive really taking off in addition to that increase in quality and also devices. The devices need to be smaller, more compact. So those are two areas where I think generative would have a lot of opportunity, like in the visual domain, to really improve things.
So there's, from what you say, there's a lot of applications, right? Outside of like in the open. How do you reassure people that are afraid that AI is going to take over and, it's going to actually turn into this,
yeah. Well,
this crazy.
I mean, yeah, if you're going to go down the path of asking me if like the AI singularity is going to happen, here's what I will say. I think somewhere along the line, we lost the thinking, like we in this era, beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we thought of us as being people that push technology forward. Now, for some reason, there's this narrative of like technology happens to us, which doesn't make any sense to me. Like we create the technology, we moderate and we regulate how it's used. And so I think that it's basically our choice what happens with the technology and we determine its future. So I'm not, and maybe some people have a different version of the future that they want to promote, but I don't think that we cannot be like, we have to be held responsible for how we now use the technology for sure.
So what do you think is important to focus on right now before, we get there? Like, would you say regulating is very important or is this something else that we need to do? What is your take on that?
That's a good question. I don't know that I have all the answers for you. I mean, obviously, I think regulating is important. I think that there's a lot of like writing now. Obviously, we're seeing books generated by AI. We're seeing people using AI for like homework, etc. So there's a lot of writing and text that's being overtaken by AI. I think that there will be an element of like this will now become commonplace. It'll be commonplace for us to be able to create this content, output this content. I think also that it's we're talking about big data. We've been talking about the amount of content that we're creating. We have this concept of being content consumers, which is different from the days when we thought of artists creating art and us viewing the art. Now we think of everybody being a content producer and a content consumer, which is weird to me. Um, but I think what people are not realizing is with generative, we're now going to create even more data, right? Because we're creating it faster. And so we're talking more text, more images, more stuff that we're going to put out there. So we really need to think, like, again, back to this data conversation is we need to organize. We need to make sure we're collecting it right. We need to have a data strategy. That's going to be super important moving forward.
Agreed. I think I read somewhere that you predict that GPT optimization is going to be as important as SEO. Can you explain and elaborate what it means for the business?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, if you go to GPT and ask it to recommend, this is what people are doing today. They're asking you to recommend products. Is your product being displayed? So there's a few different things that factor into that. So if you sort of ask GPT how it does that, it's using a lookup tool and it's using current information, but it's only focusing on three major sources. And so having your product information very clean on the product display page, having all of the attributes, all the features and functions, having copy that defines your product, but then also making sure that people are writing about your product, people are experiencing your product. And you can use generative to do a lot of that stuff. Like you can use generative to create the more images to you, use generative to create the alt text to make sure everything's SEO, so that your product is being surfaced and recommended when people are asking about this stuff. That's going to be really, really key.
I think you also mentioned that you believe generative AI is going to move us away from template approaches. What do you mean by that? And what does it mean for the future of e-commerce?
Yeah, so that's a big, big topic. So for a while within tech, we had the paradigm of wizards, right? So we had the UI wizard that's going to guide you through doing X, Y, Z. And especially within e-commerce, which has been moving, I would say, slower than other categories in that respect, because e-commerce is very developer centric. People love to design their websites. They want to get access to the code. So there's still a ton of that going on within e-commerce and different e-commerce platforms. But some people have been using wizards, like especially if you take a look at the Lightning interface within Salesforce, it's like a wizard-driven data schema application. You're creating apps using Lightning, and it's sort of driving you towards that. Well, that whole paradigm is good, but it also can be slow because wizards take a lot of computing power to run and display, whereas like really the computer would much rather prefer that you were just coding, but like we can't all be coders, right? So now that we can generate code, the question is, how important is the wizard? If we can just ask it to generate a web page for us, do we really need the UI to walk us through that? And so potentially we have a future in which we are actually the wizards of the software world and the UIs are not as important and they kind of disappear. And we are just simply talking and engaging with an algorithm to create the experience that we're looking for, which is going to make experiences faster.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's very, I'm very excited to see that also because myself, for example, I like to do a lot of things just like you. And I think it also, there's a big wave in different fields of democratization. And I think that's why it's so big nowadays, right? Can you talk a little bit about this trend that we're seeing in, a lot of like, for example, Databricks talking about democratization of data and AI, Salesforce as well with generative AI. Can you elaborate a little bit about what's going on?
Yeah, so it's interesting because it's like two sides of the coin. Data wants to be known, but data also wants to be private. And there's this constant conflict between these two areas. So I I don't think necessarily, I think the word democratization is sometimes a euphemism of lack of privacy. So I don't necessarily think that data should be completely democratized. I think that if you're going to have a data strategy, you need to have a privacy policy in place. who can access that, when can they see that, when is that data used, because you can't have a free-for-all. So I think that's really what people like should be considering when they're setting up these systems for their corporations, is ethical use of this information and making sure that you're maybe even like ahead of regulation, because I think sometimes regulation falls behind where tech is going, but like ahead to give, to basically create trust. Because I think there's also like this idea of customers may not be ready to trust you if they think everything's AI. And so how do you, from a brand experience, how do you build that trust with a customer? By being very clear where AI is being used, by being very clear about what data is being shared, by being very clear of how their data is being used. To like go the other way and completely destroy your brand perception isn't that, even if you do some sort of short term, if you have some sort of short term gain, it's not a good long term strategy for any company.
What are your top recommendations for a business that is just starting to explore generative AI?
I would say start small, just start. Use it internally in areas where there's smaller impact. We see this with like composable commerce, for example. So I do a lot of conversations about headless and what it would be like to have, completely curated front end that isn't sitting on any single system. And we often see that people will experiment with a pop-up or experiment with a landing page, but keep the cart central. And so you got to figure out, where does it make sense to experiment? Where does it make sense to test? But I think it's really important to start using something, because right now, as a company, you have the opportunity to give feedback to the vendors. The vendors, all of us, we're testing the market on what's needed. And so if you become a practitioner, you start using it, you can report back, and you can vote with your dollars essentially by paying for the technologies that are going to be built, right? So participating in that economy means defining and deciding what generative future we all live in.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think people get wrong about generative AI or AI in general?
Oh, good question. I don't know that there's anything maybe wrong. I think that sometimes we use the word AI very liberally to mean a lot of different things, because there's many different kinds of AI underneath the hood. And then there's also AI as differentiated from machine learning, which is different, right? So I think that there's this like correlative AI or regular recommendation AI, with the predictive type of AI. And then there's the generative type of AI, which is fundamentally different. So those are sort of two different branches. And what's happening now is people are talking about generative, but actually people are behind implementing just regular predictive AI. And so those two are kind of being lumped together now in terms of like here, so you can use them together. And so people are actually going back and being like, well, hang on, I'm not ready to do generative, but I haven't even done predictive, so let's do that. So I think those two things, and then sometimes people, or I don't know if it's still the case, but I used to get a lot of questions. So what is the algorithm? How do we trust it? And I always tell people it's not really about the algorithm, because the way that most AI works now is almost like brute force. It's like trains on volume. So it's not really about how good the algorithm is. It's not about how good my algorithm is, compared to somebody else's. It's really about the volume of the data. And so the more data you have, the more winning your algorithm is, right? So there's also that, is you shouldn't really be sort of massaging the model, but what you should be is feeding the model with more data, and the data that you want it to have, because you also want to make sure that you're gating and you're not allowing it to find fake correlations. Like, great example would be, let's say you launch AI to do hiring, and you happen to have a lot of Mark Smiths at your company. And then so your algorithm decides that you need more Mark Smiths. Those are the ones that are going to do well. And like that name has nothing to do with whether or not that person's qualified to work at your company. So you also want to make sure that when you're training the AI, that you put gates around what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. Because it could very well be giving you nonsensical answers.
Yeah. This has been a very, very interesting conversation. I want to give you the floor to say any last word, anything that you want. I just want to give you the freedom of speaking to the audience.
Well, obviously, listen to my podcast, Salesforce Commerce Cloud Innovations podcast. And I just want to say, Sasha, I think what you're doing is really, really cool, and I hope that we see more from you and from the conversations you're having.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.